Back now to our top story. The government's proposed super profits tax on miners has led to an eruption of fury from some of the biggest names in Australian mining. They've accused the government of deception and claimed the tax will lead to the shelving of important mining projects and the loss of Australian jobs. Well, joining us now in Brisbane is one of the fiercest opponents of the tax, mining executive Clive Palmer. Thanks for being there.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, does the super profit tax threaten the viability of your $6.5 billion Galilee Basin coal project, sometimes called the biggest coal mine in the world?
I think it threatens the viability of our whole country. Never in the history of this country has so much wealth been wiped off the ledgers of the Australian people as we've seen the last 3 days, when $16 billion has been wiped off the value of mining stocks in Australia, when mums and dads and ordinary Australians have seen the Treasurer destroy their future and their future retirement. And this is what's really wrong. It goes at the whole viability of our nation. That's why it's got to be stopped. And that's why Tony Abbott's the last sentry at the gate, and he'll throw the government out the next election.
So tell us about this biggest mine in the world, your Queensland Galilee project. Is it under threat or not? In reality, will it go ahead?
Well, I think the things we've announced will go ahead because we've put the finance in place for the things that we've already announced. But there are projects that we haven't announced that we've been planning that we'd have to stall on if this was to become a reality. But I don't believe Australians will cop it. I don't believe they'll accept a regime where normal people pay 30 cents in the dollar tax, normal companies, for putting their money in the bank, and my miners are hit 70% for going out there, taking the risk, creating the jobs and creating the exports. I'm quite happy to have a super rich tax, to tax me all you want to. Tax me 90%, tax me 101%, but don't destroy the economy and don't destroy the industries that are employing thousands of Australians, ordinary mums and dads around Australia. That's what the Treasurer is doing, and he doesn't realise it.
Well, let's get this straight, though. A 40% super profit tax does not threaten this $6.5 billion project in Queensland.
It doesn't provide the returns that we expected it to provide, but it doesn't threaten it because we've already had it approved. But it does threaten the ability to expand that project to make it bigger than it could be. We shouldn't be happy with a $6.5 billion project. We should want a $20 or $30 billion project. We should want more Australians to be employed, better balance of payments, and a better future for our children. We've got to set the standards a lot higher than they have been set by the Treasurer. He's suggesting let's take our best industry and destroy it and bring it down to the level of the rest of our economy. Rather, his job should be to bring the economy up to the level of the mining sector and be producing the same sort of profits right across the board.
What are your Chinese investment partners saying about this?
Well, they're very disappointed, and they're very disappointed because Australia did have the reputation of being a politically stable economy, one where you could invest in with some certainty about how the government would react. This sort of move by the Treasurer and by the government destroys our credibility overseas, and people in countries such as South America, South Africa are very, very happy because they can take and try to take the markets that we've had for such a long time.
But the Chinese investment partners, they're still going ahead in spite of this in Queensland, is that right?
Well, they're already committed. They've already signed up. So if they hadn't been signed up, we don't know what would have happened. They certainly do honour their contracts, and we honour our contracts with them. But I think the real problem is, will anyone look at new projects when there's a 70% taxation regime on a new project? That's the real killer. Because people who haven't committed their funds, haven't looked at new projects, won't commit them to Australia anymore. They'll go to other countries. Everyone knows this is true, and this is bad for our workforce. It's bad for the mums and dads that work in the mines. It's bad for regional Australia, and it's bad for our economy. We only just got through the recession because of the excellent performance of our resource sector. It wasn't because of the stimulus that the Prime Minister rolled out, where everyone had the ability to buy a video or a television from Korea or Japan, which may have done something for their economies. It was because the hard work that the average Australian worker has done in the mines in Western Australia, Queensland and elsewhere that kept our balance of payments on top of the world. OK,
but you've said this week that you've already cancelled, as a result of this tax, 2 projects, one in South Australia and one in Western Australia. Tell us about those projects.
Well, we've cancelled any further exploration in South Australia, which we were carrying out, because it's just not worth risking the dollars under that uncertainty. Also in Western Australia, we've been looking at expanding further our iron ore operations to a much, much larger scale, and we've cut that back. But so's Rio Tinto. They've cancelled $11 billion expansion, as I understand
no, apparently they haven't actually done that. That was the story on the front page of the Australian late today. Rio Tinto told the stock exchange that's not what they were doing. They were just reviewing their whole range of projects.
Well, naturally, I think everybody was encouraged by the comments of the Leader of the Opposition today, when he made it absolutely clear that when he's elected as Prime Minister, that there won't be such a tax introduced in 2012.
All right.
I guess that enabled Rio to review their position.
All right, I thought you had to get a political plug in there somewhere, but Kevin Rudd, putting the onus on the other side of the political equation, Kevin Rudd says that whenever you propose an increase in a tax to the mining sector, you get exactly this sort of response. You'll say that projects will close or be shifted offshore, but in reality, that's unlikely to happen.
I mean, the reality is the stock market in the last 3 days, where $16 billion of value was wiped off Australian mining stocks. That's the reality. That's something
but
the
it wasn't.
If
I can just make the point about that, because you mentioned that earlier. I mean, it wasn't only mining stocks that suffered. It was banking stocks and stocks right across the board, and largely because of the problems in Europe.
I don't think that was the case. I think it was mainly mining stocks, if you look at it. But anyway, the situation is the Treasurer should be trying to create value. We don't want to see any Australian shares going down. It's his job to create value. You don't create jobs, you don't create exports, you don't create growth by imposing further taxes. You may think you do. You've got to inspire the people of this country. You've got to give them real leadership and give them the ability to invest in projects that will provide real jobs and create real wealth, not destroy wealth. And that's what the Labor Party and Mr Rudd's about, destroying the wealth of Australians. We've seen $150 billion increase in our debt under this government. And it's about time that someone held them to account. The Prime Minister's not to blame for anything. You ask him, he'll tell you that.
All right, let's go through this question as to whether or not real projects are actually going to be canned, because you've said you can too. Can you give us any idea at all of the size of these projects or the revenue they might have generated if you had continued down the path of developing them?
Well, I think one of them would have contributed around about 3,000 direct workers' jobs in the workforce, and probably about $2 billion a year in exports.
Where is that project actually?
Well, it's currently being approved under the West Australian EIS process in WA. It's a real project, and you can look it up on their EIS website. But what's important is for the average Australian to realise that if an investor, be it a mum and dad to invest in a mining stock or a major mining company to invest in a project, has got two alternatives. One, to be taxed at 30% by investing in long-term government-backed bonds, or to be taxed at 70% by investing in a risky resource development project where you may not even get your return. Where are you going to go? You're going to go to the 30% project.
That's a point you've made, but just in terms of the detail of what you've actually cancelled, you're talking about a project that would have employed, you say, 3,000 people, is that correct? Around
3,000 people long term.
And what sort of investment are you talking about? What level of investment would you have put into this project?
That project was probably about $2.7 billion Australian, yeah, in that sort of order.
Because, I mean, you'd be aware that the Treasurer's Office has been very sceptical about whether these projects you're talking about actually exist. And they referred specifically to the South, in a statement last night, to the South Australian project you were talking about. They said they'd checked with the South Australian Resources Department, with the Federal Resources Department. No such project existed.
Well, as I said, I did correct you at the beginning of the program. That was an exploration that we were carrying out in South Australia, exploring for minerals rather than developing them. And we've decided that the risks are too great. And we own a tenement which is about 500 square kilometres, known as Cosmo, by one of our subsidiary company, Cosmo Developments, which has an exploration tenement in South Australia close to the BHP Olympic Dam project, which we were looking at doing major exploration in the coming year. And we've had to review that. much as many of the miners are reviewing things at the moment.
You're reviewing it and may come back to it, or reviewing it and canning it, as you suggested earlier?
Well, certainly we'll be back to it when Tony Abbott's elected as Prime Minister. There's no doubt about that. And this tax is thrown out once and for all, as it should be, and the Treasurer is thrown out of office, as he will be at the next election.
Are you going to shift these big investments offshore, as you've already threatened to do? You mentioned Indonesia at one point.
Well, it's very easy to move money overseas if you've got money. It's not very difficult to do. The Treasurer is always very helpful to let Australian dollars go overseas.
But you've got money. You've got money. You've got big investment dollars that you can invest in mining projects. Are you going to take that money offshore?
Well, faced